Joining us on the line is Chris Rufo, writer, filmmaker, senior fellow at Manhattan Institute, the driving force behind the movement to stop critical race theory in America's schools, and also the chief mover in the push to stop public schools from indoctrinating kids into radical gender theory. Chris, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
It's good to be with you.
So, Chris, obviously you've become the target of much of the legacy media. They're very angry at you because you've pointed out what major corporations like Disney have been doing, the bizarre nexus and ugly nexus between democratic governance, media institutions, and corporate America bullied into doing the bidding of the former two. You've gotten a lot of flack for this. What's your response to the idea that you're some sort of evil ideological actor hell-bent on falsifying information?
Well, I think if you look at, for example, my profile in the New York Times or my coverage in MSNBC, it appears that I'm single-handedly manipulating the nation's politics. They called me a far-right mastermind. There's actually a compliment embedded in the slur because, somehow I'm doing this all by myself. But the reality is quite simple. What I've done is I've exposed what's really happening. I've done it using original source documents that can't be denied or disputed, and then shown it to people in a compelling way. And so really, it's not that I'm some sort of all-powerful Svengali. It's that I'm showing the American people exactly what's happening in our institutions, and the American people are driving this really furious reaction. And so, while I would like to take credit, the truth is much simpler. It's that when you show people what's happening with critical race theory and gender ideology in companies and schools, they're going to react very strongly because most people oppose it.
So, Chris, one of your targets here has been Disney. You uncovered this video with members of the Disney brass basically saying openly that they are pushing a quote-unquote not at all secret gay agenda in the content that is designed for children, that they wish for a huge number of their top-line characters to now be LGBTQ plus IA, et cetera, and this obviously spurred a massive backlash. We here at Daily Wire, we'd already been planning on getting into the kids' content business. This accelerated our push. We pledged to spend $100 million creating alternative children's content here at Daily Wire. Now you're pushing for a full-scale boycott of Disney and Disney Plus. I got to be honest with you, Chris, like on a personal level, this is painful for me because I'm a huge Disney fan. As a Disneyland annual pass member in California, we live a couple of hours from Disney World here in Florida, and I love Disney World. It's great. But the simple fact is I'm not willing to subject my kids to the kind of mental poison that apparently Disney employees wish to subject my kids to. And so I did cancel Disney Plus to the, to the great gushrise of some of my kids. They're still able, thank God, to view the old Disney movies via Amazon. But it is amazing how Disney has blown out its core mission here.
Yeah, that's right. I've actually done a series of reports over the last year and on Fortune 100 companies taking a look at their internal ideologies. And Disney, of all the companies I've reported on, I have documents from about a third of the Fortune 100 companies. Disney is by far the worst. It was promoting last year critical race theory. It told employees that America was systemically racist, had encouraged employees to sign a white privilege checklist, and then promoted a variety of fashionable causes like defunding the police. And then fast forward a year, and they're promoting this kind of radical gender ideology, saying that we're going to embed gender ideology into programming, targeting kids as young as 2. And they're kind of just gleefully going with all of these really left-wing theories and saying we're going to use our power as the largest kids entertainment company to push them on kids that in some cases, are kind of pre-verbal. I mean, really young kids. And so we have to do something about it. At Daily Wire, you guys are providing an alternative. I think we also need to actually make companies like Disney pay a price. So I'm launching this campaign at dropdisney.com with a very simple goal, encouraging people to sign a pledge to drop Disney Plus, and then to show force to the company that people aren't going to stand for these kind of values being promoted. And I think with that one too, with having people remove their dollars from companies that don't reflect their values, and then maybe put those dollars into alternative forms of entertainment and content, that's how we're going to actually shift the culture. It's one thing to just say, hey, this is a terrible thing that's happening. But conservatives need to get tough, because if we don't apply countervailing pressure on these big companies, they're going to cave into the left every time.
So, Chris, one of the big issues that has cropped up here is, of course, here in Florida, Ron DeSantis and the Republican state legislature, they passed a bill to strip Disney of its Reedy Creek special tax exemptions. That was a special tax exemption, right? Disney was a beneficiary of it. Disney decided to play around in politics, basically at the behest of the left, and Florida fought back by saying, listen, you guys don't get special tax exemptions if you're going to start acting like political actors. A lot of folks, both right and left, have been complaining this is a violation of free speech principles. The argument that I've made is that in a vacuum, I don't like this sort of action, but we are not in a vacuum. And the simple fact is that government and every major institution in America has now been forcing corporations into doing the dirty work of the Democratic Party and of the federal government. And so if there's no countervailing pressure, then basically mutually assured destruction is better than being nuked by woke corporations.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that the factor in the C-suite is very simple. Executives respond to incentives, they respond to pressure, they respond to a political messaging. And what's happened is that the right, buying into, I think, a really false and narrow notion of free speech and free markets, has really just let the left run on these left-wing cultural issues with no countervailing pressure, with no opposing pressure. But, I was there actually at the signing of the bill stripping Disney of the special status. It actually does two things. One, it's actually pro-free market in the sense that Disney now has to compete against Universal Studios and SeaWorld on equal terms. They don't get special cronyist privileges. But DeSantis was very clear in the speech during the signing ceremony. He said, hey, look, I saw the videos that leaked. I saw the kind of values that they're promoting. We have to look out for the values of our citizens, and we have to put a kind of a pressure or a disincentive for that kind of activity. And so, listen, when companies play politics, they're playing politics. And the right to free speech, which Disney has, of course, is not an entitlement to special treatment. I mean, that's just such an absurd thing. And really, it's been abused by the left. They've used this kind of dead consensus of right-wing free markets to kind of bully the right to adhere to principles that in practice aren't working very well. I think you and I both support free markets, but it also is in the context of promoting good values.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just promoting free markets. The simple fact is that these corporations are not acting because they wish to engage in the market. They're acting specifically because the left wing has provided an artificial set of incentives so that all these corporations are now speaking out about issues that don't concern them whatsoever, whether it's MLB getting involved in voter ID law in Georgia, or whether it's Disney attempting to sound off about issues with regard to education of 5-year-olds in public schools. These are corporations that are now being wielded as political tools by the left under threat. And basically what's happening here is that in a certain sense, you are freeing up CEOs to just say no. I mean, that's really what this is about. Most CEOs, I really believe, and this is true for most companies, they don't want to be involved in these issues. The left drags them kicking and screaming into these issues. Then they sound off. And because there's no countervailing incentive from the right, it's an asymmetric polarization. I mean, you see this over and over and over. Disney did not want to be part of this fight. Disney was dragged into this fight by the media and the left and by governmental actors on the national level who were calling on Disney to get involved because they were saying, basically, you want to be on our good side, you're going to be on the bad side of Ron DeSantis in Florida. And most of these corporations, as you see, don't want to be involved. I think that the real story in what's happening with Disney in Florida is the dog that didn't bark. One of the things you're not seeing is other major corporations in Florida getting involved in the fight because they don't want to be part of this fight. They never wanted to be involved in this fight. And now they can actually go back to their shareholders and say, listen, we don't want to be involved in the fight, and we're not going to be taking account of the editorial page of the New York Times because it's going to lower your stock price if we do.
Yeah, that's right. But we have to do it. And I think the Wall Street Journal has recently reported that CEOs are now talking to one another saying, hey, what do we do to avoid becoming the next Walt Disney Co? Because, since this fight with DeSantis, since the leaking of these internal videos, Disney's lost about $50 billion in shareholder value, not all of which may be attributed to this, but certainly a large percentage of it. And so corporate America is waking up to a conservative movement and some Republican leaders like Ron DeSantis who are going to say, hey, if you transgress us, there will be a price. And I think that's exactly the right move. And what we've seen, too, I think this is significant. We haven't seen, rather, the major companies, the Fortune 100, the Fortune 500, screaming and issuing statements about this leaked Roe v. Wade decision. I think had the Disney example not been set, we would be hearing a lot more from big companies. And so this campaign is working. I think we need to put more pressure on Disney. We need to create an example, both through policy, but also through a kind of consumer-driven boycott, because these companies, even if it's a slowdown in the rate of growth, not even reversing subscriptions, but just slowing down subscriptions, that has a lot of leverage on the stock price. That has a lot of leverage on the business. And so if we can get 50, 100,000 people to sign the pledge at dropdisney.com, we're going to do significant damage when the company reveals its quarterly earnings in the coming weeks.
That's Chris Rufo. You can check out all of his work over at the Manhattan Institute. He's also very active on Twitter. And check out dropdisney.com. Chris, really appreciate your hard work on this stuff.
Thank you.
Did you know that every single like creates one additional leftist tier? That is just science.